I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to this preview of Shrinking Trump.
On today's show, we take a look at what we call the looming constitutional crisis ahead, as Trump and Musk break all kinds of laws and norms with very little pushback except from the courts. And as we know from J.D. Vance, he doesn't think the courts have anything to say to the executive branch. So we cover that issue, and we also have a very special guest. John?
We'll be talking to Barbara McQuade. Many of you know from MSNBC as a legal contributor and a professor of law at University of Michigan, talking about misinformation and its effect on our democracy, talking about her latest book, which is on that topic, and discussing the looming constitutional crisis as well. The other thing we want to talk about is the looming constitutional crisis.
Yes.
Let's hear from our friend George Conway. This is on, by the way, this is on Morning Joe. I do want you to notice how Morning Joe kind of normalizes a little bit what Trump is doing. And then
he's been doing it for 3 weeks now. He's been doing this thing. Oh, it's not that bad. Everything will be okay.
And George, I think, in the starkest and clearest terms, is explaining what we're facing right now.
Let's bring in our now conservative attorney, George Conway. George, remarkable that these people went to law school. But I want you to just talk just in general, and we're going to go through, again, just to show all the times Joe Biden's executive orders were either enjoined or overturned. But this happens, right? Presidents do executive orders at the beginning of the term. Not to this degree, not pushing the boundaries as much, perhaps, as President Trump has done. But this happens. There are challenges. Some things get through. Some things don't. But you don't have a vice president. I guess Spiro Agnew probably did. But you don't have a vice president going out there going, oh, the court can't do this. They can't stop our legitimate power when, of course, again, the Supreme Court determines what the executive branch's legitimate powers are and what they are not. And it has been that way for 240 years, has it not?
Yeah, absolutely. And, J.D. Vance is an embarrassment to the law school that I attended. But the fact of the matter is he's telling us something that we should have already known. And last week I said it. They are not going to obey court orders. They have decided that they are going to push the boundaries on executive power by basically infringing on the Article 1 power of Congress. And they are violating they're writing the Constitution, the text of the Constitution in the birthright citizenship issue. They are violating the text of statutes by having DOJ run around and do all the things that have been doing these executive orders. There's no reason that this government that has decided not to obey the laws and the Constitution of the United States is going to obey a court order. And as you know, Joe, having practiced law, there's really only one way that courts can enforce their orders when somebody is being contumacious and refusing to obey an order. And that's to send the U.S. Marshals out to take somebody in and to hold them in contempt or to otherwise enforce court orders. Well, who does the U.S. Marshals Service work for? The U.S. Marshals Service is part of the United States Department of Justice. It reports to Donald J. Trump. And what's going to happen here, mark my words, is that at some point, they are going to basically tell the United States Marshals Service, do not enforce any of these orders. We will not obey them, and you are not to enforce them. And once that happens, I hope it doesn't happen, but I know in my heart that it will. Our 236-year experiment in the federal rule of law, in democratic self-governance for the United States of America, in American constitutionalism, is essentially over.
I mean, I want people to take that in.
He's so eloquent.
Yeah.
And there it is. Well, one other factor that you're bringing up, which I find really interesting, because I think you're right that if inflation increases as it is, if things start to fall apart, he'll be held accountable. But the other factor that John and I talk about as psychologists is that Trump has this unerring ability to self-destruct. he makes terrible decisions, and he trusts himself so much that he can't be talked out of terrible things. So sometimes I think there's a trajectory that's taking us to a constitutional crisis, but there's also a trajectory of Trump's psychopathology that's going to bring us to a kind of crash because of him. And I'm hoping that the crash happens before the full-blown constitutional crisis, although it doesn't look that way, but I'm hoping so.
Yeah, I'm no psychologist, so I can't tell you about those things, but I can look at history and look at things like Trump University and the Trump Foundation that were ultimate failures. Even his own business was proved in a civil trial to have been built on a house of fraud, fraudulent business practices, falsifying business records, the subject of his criminal case. So all of those things. I also do have some hope, even if Republicans in Congress aren't doing anything to stop him, that our courts will hold. We have seen a number of legal challenges to many of the executive orders he has already issued. And although, certainly his election gives him a mandate to further his policy ideas, it doesn't give him a mandate to violate the law. And we are seeing judges appointed by presidents of both parties sticking to the law and saying this violates a statute, this violates the 14th Amendment, you can't do that. And although this Supreme Court does share some of his worldviews, like the idea of a powerful unitary executive in the presidency, I don't think they're lawless. I think they have some very conservative viewpoints, and those will prevail. But I don't think they're going to be a rubber stamp for anything Donald Trump wants to do, even if it violates the rule of law.
So what we're describing here is a kind of race, sort of a race to the bottom of, will Donald Trump self-destruct, or will the destructive effects of his policies alienate the public before they can take complete dictatorial control and collapse all of our institutions? That's the basic race. And right now, it doesn't look like we're winning that race because, among other things, Masha Gessen said, we talked about this earlier in the show, she's never seen a democracy collapse as quickly as the United States appears to be doing. And she's an expert, obviously, on authoritarian takeovers. That she is shocked at the rapidity of it. So if we're talking about a race, they're off to a damn good head start. They're about a lap ahead of us. And so the question is, can we avoid a constitutional crisis? I think you laid out the way. We know Congress will do nothing. So I think you have, if we are going to survive, I think you have already laid it out, that it will be judges who will enforce the law. Ultimately, it will have to be the Supreme Court that enforces the law. And then we'll be at the question of whether he will defy a court order. And if he does, the New York Times had it under a editorial board editorial today, that if he defies a Supreme Court ruling, we can literally officially bring in a doctor and call the time of death for the United States of America as a democracy.
Well, they said it was a constitutional crisis. They didn't say they were calling it. Did they really say it was the death of democracy?
They said that will be the line that it's over.
Well, may I point out?
Quote.
May I point out that Donald Trump has already defied the Supreme Court? You may recall that the TikTok ruling said that they had to make their decision by January 19th. And he granted a 75-day pause to see if they can find a buyer. That's not what the statute says. The statute says the president may pause it if a sale is imminent, and he can show the paperwork. Hey, we just have to sign, dot the I's, cross the T's, and it's ready to go. He can grant a 90-day reprieve. He hasn't shown that, and nobody's stopping him. So I think all of these efforts are testing his powers as president in an effort to expand them, in an effort to get the courts to say, here are the things that Congress gets to do, and here is a much wider swath that the president gets to do than we've ever had before. But perhaps because TikTok is so popular, there hasn't been a lot of pushback on this one. Yeah. But if it is something like, we are going to deny birthright citizenship to anyone born in this country if their parents are undocumented, and we're not going to issue passports and birth certificates for those people, that would be a constitutional crisis. And I don't know who can stop them. The only remedy at that point, really, under our constitutional structure, is impeachment, which requires Congress, the House, to impeach and the Senate to convict. You would hope that at some point, if the misconduct or the disobeyance of a Supreme Court order is so great, that at some point, members of Congress would choose country over party, but at the moment, I don't see it happening. I heard someone say the other day something which is so apt. Our Constitution talks about separation of powers, but these days in Congress, it's much more about separation of party. And we need those members of Congress to stand strong and follow their oaths to uphold the Constitution over any one man.
Apparently there's another measure, by the way. You can dispatch the U.S. Marshals to arrest him. But I think the odds of that are even lower than the odds
because the U.S. Marshals are
the Republican Congress
of Justice.
You see what? Yeah, they're part of the executive branch.
Exactly. You think Pam Bondi is going to send the marshals out to arrest her boss? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the end of our preview. But you know what? Don't just watch the preview. Go find the whole show. You can find us on the Really American Network. Search for it on YouTube, or you can search for Shrinking Trump wherever you get your audio podcasts. We drop our shows live streamed every Friday Eastern Time at 3 p.m. And we really hope to see you there. Don't just watch this preview. Watch the show.
See you there.
Bye.